I think we're going to go ahead and get started with the seminar. So my name is Garett Patterson. Okay, so I actually work for a company called Startup Up as an ad specialist, but my background is actually in management. So I've actually been managing groups of people for about just under 10 years now. And I put this presentation together to go over, the basics of coaching and developing your team. Okay, um, so let's get started. Let's get into it. So the agenda today, what we'll be going over are some core guidelines, when coaching is appropriate, why we coach, coaching documents, and presenting coaching material. So coaching guidelines. So the coaching guidelines that I have here are things that when you're coaching, you should keep in mind, okay? So core guidelines. So remember that no one wants to do a bad job. So this is an important guideline. And it's actually so funny. This is something actually my mother taught me because she was also a great manager for many years. And this is important to keep in mind when you're coaching people, because you need to understand that when someone is underperforming on your team, it's almost certainly not because they want to do a bad job. Most people, when you hire them, and there are exceptions, want to do a good job for you. So when you're going to consider coaching someone, it's important to keep this in mind that, my employee does want to do a good job. So doing kind of and we'll go into this a bit more detail later on, a root cause analysis as to why they are underperforming. Okay. Second core guideline would be, as a leader, it is unreasonable for you to expect your team members to act against their own self-interest. Okay, so what this means is that it's unreasonable for you as a business owner or a manager to expect your employee to act against their own self-interest. And what that means is that if, as a manager, you've built an environment for a team member to perform a certain way, it's unreasonable for you to expect them to perform against the environment that you've set up. Okay, so when you're coaching or considering coaching a team member, you need to really look at the environment that they're working in, the environment you set up, and understanding, are their actions or behavior unreasonable for the environment that they're working in. And if they aren't unreasonable, then you need to start again with the root cause analysis. We'll go in more detail later. Understand, what about that environment can you control to allow them to act within their own self-interest, without damaging the performance, without allowing them to perform against the expectations of the company. Okay. The third core guideline right here would be, don't let your team do anything that would make you dislike working with them. Okay. One of the when I was training new supervisors and new managers, one of the things that they struggled with was understanding, when is it appropriate to coach? And I used to tell them, if a team member is doing something that would make you dislike working with them as a peer, then it's something you should be addressing. Letting people get away with what unsure if it's worthy of coaching. If you let someone get away with that, then you create a situation where, letting them get away with this time and then coaching another time is inconsistent. Okay. So it's really important, if you're ever wondering, should I talk to them about that? Should I coach them about that? You should be asking yourself, would the actions that I just saw make me dislike working with them as a peer? Okay. And usually that will help guide you in a way that, um, that you're making the right decision. So why do we coach? So we coach to drive results, we coach to drive engagement, and we coach to manage professional relationships. Okay. So when we're driving results, we're focusing on the opportunities to improve employee performance. So coaching isn't just about focusing on what the team member did wrong. It's focusing on the opportunity that they have in front of them. Okay. And when we coach, talking about opportunity and using that word opportunity is a more positive reinforcement that we use when we coach people. Okay. So we're not going to go, when we coach someone, go, this is what you did wrong. No, we're going to go to them and go, this is the opportunity identified, and this is what I would like you to work on. Okay. So it's very important that we do it with positive reinforcement rather than negative. All right. Driving engagement. So address negative and positive behavior. So if you don't give your team feedback often, then they will become disengaged. People want to know whether or not they are performing well or performing poorly. And addressing negative and positive behavior will give them that reinforcement to understand, yes, I'm performing well, or no, I'm not, and what can I do about it? That's why it's important that we address the negative and we also address the positive. When someone performs well with you, you want to make sure that you are giving them the positive reinforcement to continue that behavior, and vice versa. If someone's not doing something that you would consider good behavior, is against what you would expect from them, you want to address it so it doesn't continue. Okay, driving engagement is one of the hardest things that managers will be faced with. Okay, and what I mean by that is, um, in large companies and industries, we actually do these things called engagement reports, where we'll send things out. Large corporations will send things out to their team members, ask them a whole bunch of questions, and we'll answer them anonymously to gauge what the engagement level is of that team. And it is very difficult to raise your engagement with your team. But one of the best ways to increase your engagement is to constantly give them feedback, both positive and negative, giving them opportunity to improve and recognizing good behavior. Okay. So manage professional relationships. So at the end of the day, we're coaching people to increase their performance, to improve their performance. But you are going to run into situations where it's just going to be, it's time to end that relationship, that professional relationship. And so we do coaching and coaching documents to avoid claims of wrongful termination. Um, so essentially to protect yourself as an owner, as a manager. It's our due diligence. When we are coaching and we are responsible for people's performance, we have to always ensure that we're doing our due diligence to give that employee every opportunity to perform and to record it. Okay. So it's not good enough to be like, well, I talked to so and so and they didn't perform and I don't think they will. So I'm going to terminate them. It's like, no. What were the conversations that you had? Okay. What were the issues that you identified? What was the action plan to address those underperformances? And where was the opportunity that you gave that employee a reasonable amount of time to improve? It's not, you can't just terminate people for underperformance. You really do need to do your due diligence to train them correctly, provide them the coaching that they need, and give them every opportunity that you possibly can before you terminate. And that's just doing your due diligence, protects your company, and it also creates an environment where people can succeed. So, when is coaching appropriate? Coaching is appropriate after we've done a root cause analysis of a team member's underperformance, and once we have considered the skill or will principle. Okay, so skill or will principle. The skill or will principle is the first step in a root cause analysis of why a team member is underperforming. Okay, skill is the investigation of adequate training provided to the underperforming team member. When skill is ruled out for a team member's underperformance, it is important to perform a root cause analysis to determine why the team member lacks will. If we have determined that will is not the reason for the underperformance, then we begin a root cause analysis into why they're lacking the skill. Okay, this is the first step. Now I'm going to talk about root cause analysis quite a bit in this document, but a root cause analysis can be used in different areas of your business. But in this case, we're going to be using it for coaching. But a root cause analysis is exactly what it's talking about here. It's finding the root cause to the problem that you are seeing. And in this situation, it's going to be team member performance. So it's just constantly asking yourself who, what, when, where, why, all these questions to get to the core reason. Okay. So root cause analysis is a deeper dive into the reason behind a result. Example, underperformance of a team member. Managers who are inexperienced in their role continue coaching and writing feedbacks for their team members without addressing the root cause. Neglecting the root cause will leave managers in a situation where they find themselves consistently addressing the same concerns with their team over and over again. Successful coaching is achieved when we see our team members develop in their role. Now, you've been wondering why I have a rabbit on this page, and the rabbit is here because this is a rabbit hole. You can get lost in root cause analysis because you will find yourself, asking yourself all these questions, going down, finding answers, and sometimes it's difficult to stay focused. So it's important that when you're doing a root cause analysis that you're focusing, yes, I'm trying to find why the team member is underperforming. Making sure that you have a solid reason for performing the root cause analysis, okay? And always asking yourself, why are they underperforming? And then continuing off that basis. Because honestly, root cause analysis, when you ask this many questions, losing sight of your original goal is quite easy, okay? So determining the root cause. In order to determine the root cause of the example given on the previous slide, we must continuously ask ourselves a series of questions, okay? Questions we ask ourselves. So, what would cause a team member to underperform? So, a reasonable conclusion would be poor training. If someone's underperforming, the first question I'm asking myself is, have they been trained correctly? Okay. Second question, who is responsible for the orientation and training of our team members in this department? The supervisor of the department is Sarah. She is responsible for the coaching and training of our team members. Okay. The third question would be, why did Sarah not follow through with the appropriate training? And the next step would be um, to continue that conversation with Sarah separately, you know? And this is why the root cause analysis is so important. So before I go on to the next slide, I'm going to elaborate a bit on this. Okay. So you can see if a team member is underperforming, we identified that it could be because they're not trained correctly. And then we went to the situation where we're talking about who's responsible, and it's Sarah. And that conversation continues with Sarah. And this is why root cause analysis for a team member underperforming is so important, because on the surface level, you have a team member that is underperforming. They're not meeting the company's standards. Okay. And after investigation, you've may have found that, yeah, they haven't been trained correctly. So it's not necessarily that team member's fault for underperforming. It's actually my supervisors. It could be potentially my supervisor's fault for not training them correctly. And then after talking with Sarah, if we find out that, yeah, she's not following the proper training procedures, then now I have to ask myself, who's responsible for Sarah's follow-up and training? And potentially that's going to be yourself. And now instead of just, giving the feedback to the team member that's underperforming, you're going to be talking to Sarah, probably giving Sarah feedback so that she understands her role. And then you're also going to put something in place probably for yourself as a manager or owner to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And this is why it's important to do these root cause analysis, because one team member underperforming is very surface level, and there could be a whole bunch of different issues below that, under the surface level, that you need to identify to ensure that team member underperformance doesn't happen again. And this is why this can be a rabbit hole, because you can just one small issue, after you dig deeply through all these things, other issues arise that need to be addressed. And that's why you need to do due diligence as an owner, manager, supervisor with the coaching element. So you do really hold everyone accountable in a situation. Okay. Because what you will find is if you do not do the due diligence, if you do not do the root cause analysis, you're going to find yourself in this situation again and again and again and again. Because even though I identified that this team member is not performing correctly, and I've told that team member they're not performing correctly, I'm going to either have another team member or the team member coming back to me again with the same issue. If this team member is not performing correctly because the training is not being implemented correctly, then I will see this issue over and over again. So the correct course of action is to teach Sarah, the supervisor, how to train correctly, ensure she knows that, and then look at why was she not trained correctly, and then ensure that we have procedures, policies in place to make sure that that gets done correctly. Okay? So coaching documents. So depending on the company, so coaching documents, I'll first say, are different everywhere you work, but the basis of them are usually the same. How they're laid out is kind of like personal preference, but the content is usually the same. Okay, so there are a series of documents you can develop internally to keep track of team performance. So the first document we're going to be talking about is called an OAC, which is an observe, assess, and coach. This is usually something that a supervisor or manager will keep. All right. And it's for minor policy or procedure infractions. Okay. It's usually displayed on a table chart, which will include the date, what the supervisor observed or manager observed, the coaching given to that team member, and a manager's signature. Okay. So an example of this would be I used to work in a processing plant. Okay. And we had time standards. And to achieve those certain time standards with team members, we had to ensure that that every part of their movement was correct. Because if they weren't moving in in the correct way, it made them slower. So I would identify a team member is not performing to the time standard. And an OAC that I would give would be, they're not using a flick motion and in what they're doing. They're not doing a certain step or they're not doing a certain motion. They're doing the job, but they're missing a certain step or they're missing something small within that element to perform to company standard. That would be an OAC. So I would go into my OAC document, I'd write today's date, I'd write what I observed, I'd write the coaching given to the team member, and I would just sign it. It's just a very quick on the job coaching to ensure that they continue to progress. Now, when 3 of those similar infractions occur, it must be escalated. Okay. So if I talk to that team member 3 times about the same situation of that minor infraction, that's no longer a minor infraction. That's showing a pattern of underperformance. And now that needs to be addressed. They're not getting the coaching, they're not understanding it. So that needs to be escalated to the next level and a more serious conversation needs to be had. Okay. And that brings us to what we call the feedback log, which is that next step. So the feedback logs are for major policy and procedure infractions. They stay on record for usually 3 months, okay? Defines what the team member did wrong and the impacts of their actions toward the company. And this is very important, their peers, okay? It's very important that we not only look at things from a company perspective, but we look at it from a peer perspective. Okay, just because someone's doing something that's not necessarily damaging the company doesn't mean they're not doing something wrong because, you know, your team's behavior and how they interact with each other are going to be a huge impact on performance. Okay, so define expectations going forward, and this document must be signed by the team member and the member of management presenting the document. Now, when we say that this stays on record for 3 months, so after you write this document, um, it stays on record for 3 months, and that means it goes into the team member's file. And after 3 months, if they have the same infraction, it just reverts back to a feedback. Okay, if they have the same infraction within that 3-month time period, it gets escalated. And by no means says after 3 months do we take this out of the team member's file, but it means we can't reference it for further feedback. Okay, we're back to square one. All right. Okay, counseling documents. So counseling documents are the next step after feedback logs. So counseling documents are usually include verbal, written, and final counseling. Okay. Counseling documents are similar to feedback logs, but reference all previously related feedback and counseling given. Okay, so they're going to include the same information, but they will reference previous infractions. An action plan is included for the team member to complete. Completing the action plan holds the team member accountable. Okay, so at the bottom of these documents, after we've referenced everything that they've done incorrectly, we are going to ask the team member to write their action plan up on how they plan to improve, essentially. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, well, why are we making them write it? The reason is because holding a team member accountable for what they say they will do is a lot easier than holding them accountable for what you say they should do. Okay, um, getting their input and their participation in the counseling procedure usually drives better results. Okay, and that's why it's important. All right. Um, counseling document. So purple. I lost my spot. Give me 2 seconds. Okay. Verbal and written counseling documents stay on file for 6 months. Final counseling stays on file for 1 year. Now, again, very important. We do not remove these documents once they've expired. We just do not reference them any longer. Okay. Counseling documents are presented and signed by two members of management. The reason why counseling documents are presented by two members of management is because usually when we start in this process of counseling, it's the first step in the termination process of a team member. Most times after a feedback, you'll see that team members progress, they learn, and you don't have to talk to them about that situation again. And if you do, it's a year down the line. It's a reminder. Once you've hit counseling, that's when you have to go and start asking yourself, okay, is this the right job fit for this team member? Because we've given them the opportunity to improve and they're not. Okay. And sometimes they do require, multiple times talking about the same situation until they do improve. But we have to include two members of management when we present these documents because it is that first step in starting the termination process. Okay. Um, the second manager is there as a witness. Okay. You'll find that once you start counseling documents, you sometimes get pushback from some team members, and it's important to have someone there to witness the counseling document presented, to witness what was said, so that people's words can't be twisted. All right. It's also great because you'll have someone presenting the document. So one manager will present while another one listens. Because usually in these situations, when you're presenting counseling, you have a disagreement from the team member. They don't see it this way, they have a different point of view. And so while someone is presenting the document and reading the document, it's nice to have someone else in the room that's listening to the conversation that's being had so they can pick up on some verbal cues and to address any questions, concerns the team member has that the person presenting may have missed. Okay. The coaching session. Okay. So when we're presenting these feedback logs, these counseling documents, it's always done in a private setting. This should never be something that you address at a public forum. If you notice that someone has done something that would result in a feedback log or a counseling document, it should never be necessarily addressed in public. It should always be, can I speak to you in the office for a second? Do you mind? Do you have time later today? I'd like to talk to you about something. Never, never, never should it ever be done in a public setting. Okay. Provide the team member with a copy to encourage participation. So when we're going to be presenting, we want to make sure that the team member has a copy of what's been written so they can, one, follow along, but they're also going to be keeping a copy for themselves. Okay. We want to make sure that they have that trust that the document that's going to be going into their file, it's going to be the exact same to the document that they have there. And it gives them that sense of, okay, they can't change the documents that they've said I've signed in any way whatsoever. I have a copy to prove that this is what was presented to me. And if they ever want to come back and say, that's not what was told to me, they have themselves proof of documentation of what was discussed. Okay. So it's kind of almost like a comfort and a trust thing that we do for our team members, again, to kind of encourage performance. Okay. So to ensure no important points are missed, we read directly from the document. So something that I find with people that are new to presenting coaching and counseling documents are that in their mind they know what they're addressing and they start kind of what we call word vomiting. And then they find after they present and they've signed, they've missed an important point that they didn't speak about. It's written on the document, but they didn't speak about it with the team member. Okay. So it's very important that just stick to what you've written there and then address any questions after. And you want to encourage the team member to ask questions and actively participate because if they do not understand what's being asked of them, what's being addressed, and they don't fully understand it, you want to be able to clarify yourself. Your goal is to make sure that they do understand what we're addressing, they do understand the next steps, and they do understand how to perform going forward. If they walk away from that conversation not understanding that, you haven't done your job and you're not going to get what you want in return. You're not going to get the team member to perform. Okay. So it's very important that you go, do you have any questions? Do you need clarification? Things like this. Management and team member must sign both copies of the document, one for the team member and one for the team member file. And that's what that's for. Again, we're making sure that they're going to walk away with a copy. and then we're going to put something in their file so we have it all organized and we can reference it later on if we have to. Okay, before we go to questions, I just want to make sure there's nothing else I want to reference. No, I think we're okay. So I do have a spot here for questions. If anyone does have any questions whatsoever or wants me to review anything that we did discuss, I will definitely open up the floor to anyone that might have questions. If not, the recording will be available to people later on.
Thanks, Garett. Definitely lots of nuggets in there worth taking, which is awesome.
No problem, no problem. Yeah. Any questions whatsoever, Emily?
I mean, I feel like I don't have too many questions. Um, I think that one of the things that's, I guess, interesting, and maybe you have an answer to, is just different things like having multiple signatures on documents and things like that. Is there different sizes of companies where you have to have, like more people look things over, less people look things over? Like I know even something, it's like once you're over 6 staff, there's different rules versus 20 staff. There's different rules. Do you have any insights on that just for like the small business vibe versus a little bit larger?
So the perspective that I gave is more of a large business vibe with the two signatures. Following up these documents, there's going to be situations where you don't necessarily have to follow these documents to do termination as a small business, but it is doing your due diligence. So if you start working in a company that has HR, these are going to be HR's expectation before you terminate. So for instance, even though a team member would be on final counseling, once that team member's final counseling was presented, you're going to be talking with your HR team at this point and letting them know, hey, this team member's on final counseling. Because if they do this infraction again, the standard would be I can terminate them. Now, before we terminate, we're going to consult with HR and we're going to talk about, did we do our due diligence? Did we do the best that we can for the team member to get them to perform? Did we do everything we can? And HR is going to be the person that reviews that. And so once you have all these documents together and you start working with an HR team, you can show, you can advise with them and go, this is a team member's underperforming. These are the counseling documents that I presented. Do you think that we've done everything that we can to terminate this team member, or have we not, or should we have done something else? And they'll tell you. And there's been some situations in the past where even though we've done one final counseling for a team member and they had another infraction, we've presented a second final counseling because we determined, you know what, the second infraction they did is related, but it's not 100% the same. So we believe that it's unfair to hold them accountable because we didn't discuss one aspect that we probably should have previously. And so we'll represent that final counseling to, again, make it clear of what the expectations are of the company. Okay,
Totally.
so
No, that definitely makes sense. And any advice for if someone, like doesn't have the HR team, what, like, how can they almost like double check themselves to make sure that they're not acting on emotion, but rather, um, you
well,
know,
that's what one of those guidelines is for, right? And it's like no one wants
yeah.
to do a bad job. Okay. And so if someone is underperforming for you, it's almost 99% of the time not because they hate you and they hate the company. You're going to have some people that are like that you'll have to deal with and terminate and get out of your business. These are what we call toxic employees. But for the most part, people want to do a good job. So as a good manager, as a good business owner, it's your job to understand from their perspective, and asking them, why don't you think you're performing in this area? What do you think you need from us to achieve the expectations that we have for you, right? And having that conversation. And sometimes what you find in that conversation, and that's why we do a root cause analysis, that you go, yeah, it's not the team member's fault. It's my fault. It's something that we haven't done. And so you've identified something that, we need to create a policy procedure around this internally so that this doesn't happen again. We're not going to hold the team member accountable because they didn't know. But now we've learned something for ourselves that this is kind of a loophole that we've missed. And so we want to
Mhm.
make sure we don't miss it going forward, right? We had this conversation and we move forward like that. The whole point of coaching and developing your team is to get them to perform because it is more expensive for you as a business to fire, rehire, retrain than to keep someone. So the whole point of coaching is to ensure that someone performs well for you. Because if you have to terminate them, you're going to spend all this time, money, and effort training someone else who might not be as good, and then to just terminate them later. To rehire someone who works well for you is more challenging than I think people think.
Totally.
It is at first, like, you do a quick interview, you go, I think I've got the right person here. Then you start working with them and you go, oh, geez, I don't think this is the right person anymore. And you run through, sometimes you go through three hires before you find the right person. It's crazy. And especially in this environment where we went through, short staff, all these people, like, we don't have, or missing qualifications. Like, you see people coming in and doing jobs that don't even have college and university degrees anymore. People are choosing them just because they accomplish what they're looking for. That's the person that they've ended up with.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then I know for some of kind of the listeners and smaller businesses out there, they're not necessarily working with salary employees. So, they might be a little bit more limited on what they legally have to do here from just the perspective of, the multiple warnings and things like that. But do you want to maybe elaborate a little more on, um, just how things could be a little bit different with a contractor, but where you'd still advise to coach or where you'd advise to maybe take the easy way out if it's an option?
Yeah. So even if you have contractors, you have things like this, it's always beneficial for you to, if someone isn't performing to your expectations, to just, it doesn't have to be a feedback, but having the conversation about, these are my expectations, and
Mhm.
getting their input if they think that it's reasonable or unreasonable. And then trying to find a middle ground. So if you're dealing with contractors, you're dealing with people that are part-time, especially, sometimes it's hard to expect them to care as much as if they were a full-time employee. And so it's trying to find that middle ground of what you deem is acceptable for their performance and having that conversation. So that's what my advice would be with that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah,
That's
like,
super helpful.
coaching and developing team members is one of the hardest things I think business owners and small business owners will have to do. And it's especially hard for small businesses because that the people that you are going to hire and that are going to help you, our majority of them are going to be people that you're friends, family with, which are going to be the hardest people to coach and develop. Like, these are tough conversations, like, if someone's underperforming, and that's why you do it with the positive reinforcements. Like, I'm not doing this to let you go. I'm doing this because I wanna push the needle and I want us to be better, I want us to perform, and that's why it's so important. And honestly, if a small business can get past the management of their friends, their family successfully, you can do just about anything, alright? Because there's no one who, like, your friends and family will talk back to you probably more than most, team members or other professionals will, I'll be honest with you, and they will be more honest with you. So if you can get past managing those groups of people, you can probably get past managing just about anyone.
There you have
Yeah,
it.
perfect.
Well, I think that's everything from me. I think
Yeah,
honestly, yeah, so much stuff there. And it's really, I mean, it's definitely interesting to see how much we can take as smaller businesses from the setup of the larger businesses. I think that one thing I definitely hear is that, I think it's very easy to be like, oh, HR and coaching and all of that stuff doesn't matter until you do have kind of more staff. But if you can take some of these things for your very first contract hire, it will make that a lot easier and like your whole flow easier. And it's almost like you want to start these things early because they are hard to navigate. As much as like going to trainings and stuff like this are awesome, you don't really know how your even like emotional reaction is going to be. I know, like, personally, sometimes those bad news conversations are very hard, whereas like other people don't find them as hard.
and honestly, sometimes, yeah, your emotions definitely in a lot of situations can take over, and that's why another good practice is if you find yourself very emotional and dealing with a team member, first of all, if you see someone doing something that requires a feedback, you should be talking to that team member that day. For sure. Now, does a feedback need to be given that day? No, you can wait till tomorrow, but you should be addressing the situation that day. And that practice really does help take the emotion out of it because you go and you just talk about, I saw you do this today. I just want to talk about it with you. And that's how you just talk it through. And then after that conversation, you can determine, okay, what's the next course of action? What's the feedback going to be about? And the nice thing about that, without including that feedback, the feedback is a moment of tension for sure between the team member and manager. So by removing that, you can almost have this open conversation and again begin that root cause analysis and get to the bottom of the situation without presenting a feedback that, that's not addressing the right issue. Sometimes if you just go into it and just start doing the feedback, you're actually not addressing the correct issue. And that's why having those conversations help with the emotions, help you talk it through. And then it takes you both a day to digest what happened. And then when you present the feedback, there's very little tension. We already had the discussion. You know what's happening today. People are calm. They're not upset. And it usually people take it much better.
Totally.
Mhm.
No, that's super good advice, honestly.
Yeah.
Cool. All
Right.
right. Well, yeah, thanks so much for joining us today, Garrett.
No
And do you
problem.
want to drop an email or anything if anyone wants to reach out, or what's
Yes.
next
So my
steps?
email, if you have any questions, is seu.social3@gmail.com. Definitely reach out to me if you guys have any questions about the seminar. I'll be happy to answer them. And yeah, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and I think we will be setting up sort of a blog with this recording and the presentation as well. So for anyone who's watching this prior to getting all of that out, that is coming. So that's perfect.
Yeah, perfect.
All right. Oh, happy
Awesome.
Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. And yeah,
Talk to you soon.
perfect. All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay, bye.
Bye.